All right, I have to come in and make this video really quick. How y'all doing? Happy preparation day to you all who are celebrating the Sabbath. I hope you have a very wonderful day of rest and are able to just kind of rest and rejoice in God. Anyways, I just want to come in and make this video. You guys, we have a tendency as human beings to look at life through our own lens and how we like things to be and how we want things to be. And unfortunately, this is a pitfall for us as believers, okay? Because we have built up in our mind, shush up. We have built up in our mind all of these castles in the sand. Okay, so what I mean by that is we have our own beliefs, we have our own moral convictions, we have our own biases about certain subjects. We have a very hard time looking at things through any other lens than our own. And this is a very dangerous thing for us to do as believers, because what we start to do is we start to put the Bible in the context of how we feel about things. So what I see is a lot of people who kind of create a God that they're comfortable with. And when we do that, we are in essence worshiping a false god. We're worshiping a false god that does not exist, okay? And this is a very dangerous position to be in. And I'm having a conversation with a woman today, and I've had this conversation before. I've made videos about this before. You guys cannot argue with the fact that polygamy existed in the Bible. You cannot argue with it. So the best thing that you should do is try to come to peace with it so that you can develop an apologetic system for it. Okay? This is a really big deal. Okay? You can't just say, well, Yahweh never intended for it to be that way. Of course he didn't intend for it to be that way. He said a man will leave his family and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one. That's how it was intended to be. But you cannot use that as your apologetics for polygamy in the Bible. You have to actually go and research why polygamy was useful. Okay? It's not about how you feel about it. Let me tell you something. If you can't come to grips with the fact that you're worshiping God has nothing to do with you, you're already lost, because it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with him. It has to do with what he instituted. It has to do what he permitted. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your feelings, okay? That is a 21st century mindset, that everything is all about how I feel about it. Well, this is what I'm comfortable with. Well, this is what I believe. God doesn't care what you believe. That's part of the submission process, you guys. I don't understand why that's so hard to believe. You have to go back and you have to research why they were using polygamy. Why was polygamy so strong in the Bible? You have to try and fathom your life from a different perspective, okay? We have to get out of this 21st century thinking. We cannot explain what happened 6,000 years ago in the Bible through our 21st century eyes. No, we have to go back and look at that in history. And we have to say, well, that's what he permitted. Why he permitted it is, it's not for me to question. It's not for you to question. It's for you to come to peace with, so that you can actually have a solid argument. But here's the deal. You can't just say, well, Yahweh never intended us to be polygamous. Okay, well, Yahweh never intended for us to wear clothes. Yahweh never intended for us to wear shoes. Yahweh never intended for us to eat meat. He didn't intend any of that stuff for us, and yet here we are today. You guys are leaving a major piece out of the equation in that, and that is the fall of man. Okay? We cannot live by garden standards today. We can never get back there. And if we could, then we wouldn't need Yeshua. Do you understand that? We wouldn't need Yeshua if we could get back to garden standards today. Do we try? Do we do what we can? Absolutely. Is polygamy something that is warranted or needed today? Probably not. But I'm sure as heck not going to stand here and tell somebody they're sinning by being polygamous. I'm not going to tell them they're sinning. They're not sinning against Yahweh. They're just not. And as long as they're not, I mean, this is the thing I have a problem with polygamy, is that every instance we've ever seen of polygamy in the news is usually a story of a forced marriage, of a marriage of a minor, things like this in this nature. And this is what gives polygamy a very bad name. But that was not the purpose of polygamy. The purpose of polygamy was to make sure that a woman was taken care of if her husband died, that a woman would be provided children, that she would not just be a widow for the rest of her life, that it gave her a chance at a second life. So even if the dead man's brother was married, he was commanded to marry his sister-in-law and give her children. Okay? We got to get out of this mindset of, well, I'm just not comfortable with that. Read the Word of God and take it at face value. Stop trying to make God fit into your little box so that you can wrap him up neatly with a bow. You know, there is no, when you come at it with a personal bias from today, okay, and you come up against, say, an atheist on YouTube in comments, you come up against somebody who's an atheist who starts pressuring you about slavery, who starts pressuring you about polygamy, and you haven't developed a solid argument for that, you're going to look like a fool. You're going to look like an idiot because you are allowing your own personal bias to create a God in your mind that does not exist. The vegan does the same thing. The vegan does the same thing. They create this God that does not exist. And they create him based on their own moral and ethical convictions. And people who go out there and say that polygamy is wrong and polygamy is never intended, those people are not actually reading the commandments. Okay? And here's another thing, you guys. I've said this once, I'll say it again. At Mount Sinai, God had the ability to right every single wrong. And he chose to not right that wrong that you've created in your mind. Why? There was a reason. So instead of just saying that's not what he ever intended, because he allowed it to continue, go back and find out why he allowed it to continue. There was a reason for it, okay? And you guys aren't seeing it because you have this bias in your mind that says it's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong because you're not looking at it as a practical practice. You're looking at it as a sexual practice. You're looking at it as a perversion. You're looking at it through the wrong lens, in other words. You're not seeing it for what it was used for at that time. So I encourage you guys, if you're out there and you're on the no, just say no to polygamy bandwagon, you need to go back and do a history lesson as to why these practices would have been useful. Why would Yahweh allow this? Because there was a reason. Yahweh doesn't do anything without a reason. There was a reason he allowed it. There was a reason he didn't just allow it, but he protected it. He protected the woman through polygamy. Okay? So, perfect example is this. One of the commandments is to be fruitful and multiply. Okay? If a man marries a woman and she can't have children, and he fears the Lord, he's going to want to fulfill that commandment. And women back then actually cared about their husbands, and they had a completely different mindset. They didn't have this feminist mindset that says the marriage is all about me. No, the marriage was all about the husband. The marriage was all about keeping the seed going. The marriage was all about the protection of the farm or the family. You know, there was safety in numbers, you guys. Now think about just a couple of these scenarios. You're married to a man who works in the field 12 hours a day, and you're barren. You're home alone all the time. Are you safe? Are you lonely? Are you protected? Think about that. Okay? If he brings in another wife, he's not divorcing you, but he brings in another wife. Now you have a companion. Now you have children in the home. This was a very practical practice, you guys. You got to get the sex out of the way, because it wasn't about the sex. It was about safety in numbers. It was about procreation. It was about all of these things. Yahweh put in place commandments to where no wife would be left behind, you know. And I'm so freaking tired of seeing people having to put God in a box. You know, just let God be who he is. Read his word, understand it. If you don't understand it, go seek it out. Don't just say this wasn't the way it was intended, because there's a lot of things that weren't intended. Okay? There's a lot of things that weren't intended. But here I am sitting here in a shirt, you know. Here I am with shoes on my feet. You know, none of that stuff was intended. We were never intended to do the things that we do today. Was Cain intended to rise up and slew Abel and kill his own brother? No, that wasn't the intention, but it happened. And not only that, now that I think about it, not only did Cain rise up and kill his brother, but in the Torah, there's also all kinds of commandments that have to do with murder and death, if you never realized that before too. So it's things are not always as black and white as you think that they are. Okay? You can't say that something is not allowed. Okay, so this is the argument, okay? Well, God never intended for us to eat meat, but he did command for us to eat meats. But if you're a vegan, I don't think Yahweh would consider that sin. I would be very, very careful about what you say. You just said that if I go and I get another wife, that I'm in sin, even though it's never commanded that I can't have more than one wife. But you just said that if I choose to disregard a commandment to eat meat based on my own ethical bias of being a vegan, that Yahweh won't consider that sin. If you don't see a problem with that, I think you need to de-churchify yourself. I really do. Because you're looking at things based on your own ethical feelings. You're basing things on your own ethical beliefs. They're not based on what Yahweh said or didn't say. They're based on your own feelings. And I would be very scared to tell somebody, oh, Yahweh's not going to consider that sin. No, you know what? If you don't eat meat, Yahweh's not going to consider that sin. That is a lie. Yahweh will consider that sin because you're breaking a commandment. And no one commandment broken is worse than another. Sin is sin. You're either doing what Yahweh tells you to do or you're not. So I would be very scary to say that to anybody. I would be very scary to put myself in a position where I can speak for Yahweh. Just saying. But, you know, at the end of the day, I can't sit here and argue with people. It's like clapping with one hand. And when you've got your mind made up and your own personal bias included into the Torah, then you're going to have chaos. You're going to have problems. You know, and you need to do a little bit more housework if that's how you really feel about things. That means that you have not completely submitted to Torah. Okay? When you are arguing what is in the Torah, you're not submitted to Torah. So I will pray for you. I will pray that your eyes be open to this. It's not, you know, by understanding polygamy and understanding its function in that time, it doesn't mean that you agree with polygamy. I don't think that polygamy is practical for today. It's not needed for today. You know? It's just not a practical practice. Nobody can afford to have more than one wife unless, of course, they're living on a farm and they're growing their own food and they're raising their own food. Then they might be able to afford more than one wife. But I mean, in the real modern world, I mean, me and my husband have a hard time making ends meet on our own. If we had to support another wife and her 4 kids, I don't think it would be a possible thing. It's very impractical when you start thinking about that. Not only that, but each wife needs to have her own residence. You know, you don't all live in the same house. You have to have separate residences. You know, it's like, do you think they all lived under one tent back then? They had different tents. You know? So all I'm asking you is to just try to stop seeing Yahweh through your eyes of right and wrong. It's not about you. It's about Him. I hope you all have a very blessed weekend and a wonderful time with your families and learning and reading and studying and fellowshipping and whatever it is you do. I hope you have a great time. I hope you hear my words and you hear my heart. I just don't know what else to say other than it is just not about you. It's not about you. Get over you and get off your throne and let the Master have His throne. I bid you all shalom. Have a great weekend.